And welcome everybody. The date is July 20th, 2021, and this is the Cloud Custodian community meeting. I'll be your host, George Castro. Thank you everyone for joining. We have people joining the meeting as we're going. This is only our second meeting, so this is the agenda introduction. We had one last time. We're going to take some time for us to quickly introduce ourselves if you haven't been here before. Some kickoff items, and then we have some agenda items today. Let's revisit the enhancement feature process Kapil mentioned last time. Marco wants to talk about policy testing. I've got a straw person proposal about Slack, and then Liz and I were thinking about doing a weekly doc session that we'd like to get some ideas and feedback on. And then I think we wanted to talk GCP provider maintainer update ? I forgot what this one's about, but we'll cross that bridge when we get there. So welcome everyone. This is only our second public meeting. We're planning on making this a regular thing. As we get through the agenda items, when we get to the end, if no one has any extra agenda items that they want to whack onto the agenda, we'll just go ahead and have a PR party. We can talk about some of the PRs, burning issues, anything that's happening in GitHub, we can discuss as a community. The idea there being we can get through like a formal agenda and then get people used to talking about how new stuff is coming in and the processes that we're doing that. So as we write things like a brand spanking new contributor guide and all this friendly kind of documentation, we can start to get that feedback and get that tight feedback loop from the community that we want. With that, is there anybody new that wants to introduce themselves, or someone from last time who wants to introduce themselves? This is optional. You don't have to introduce yourself, but if you've been using Cloud Custodian, we'd love to get to know you, get your feedback and things like that. And I'll go first, so you don't have to. George Castro started a Stacklet a few weeks ago to kind of help get things like this rolling. He, him, his, and I live in Ann Arbor, Michigan, and my hobbies are F1 and NBA. Anybody want to introduce themselves?
Yeah, I'll introduce myself as well. Hey, Marco Ceppi. I've also at Stacklet, and I've worked on some of the Cloud Custodian OSS stuff recently, mostly around some of the C7 and Terraform pieces and GCP Cloud pieces. And I'm he, him.
Hey, John Hillegas. I'm at Capital One, he, him, and we are contributors to the AWS provider.
Wayne Wetzel, work at Stacklet, he, him, and I live in Durham, North Carolina, and I don't have any hobbies.
Excellent.
Hey everyone, I'm Sonny, he, him. I'm out in LA. Excited to have this second meeting.
Hey,
wait, are we doing this? Oh, go for it.
So I work at Capital One too, and I live in the Tysons area close to Reston. Have been around on the project for a couple of years now.
Excellent. Welcome. Anybody else? Totally optional. You don't have to.
Okay, I'll jump in. So I'm Liz. Pronouns are she, her. I am a developer advocate at Stacklet. I am in the city of San Francisco in California. And let's see, hobbies include plants and like wondering like about the world. No, I was gonna say thinking, plants, like thinking about thinking. Honestly, yeah.
Cool. Anybody else?
Hey everybody, David Glick. I work at Capital One. I am the product manager for the internal platform of Cloud Custodian at Capital One. And he, him, live in Richmond, Virginia, and very much into international travel. Just got done with my second trip a few days ago to Europe since restrictions were lifted.
Was it fun? Was the trip fun?
I had an amazing time. I'm a big foodie, and the restrictions really weren't that bad at all. But apparently, right after I left, things started to get crazy.
Mm. Are you going to tell us where you went? Is it good? Okay. All right. Let's move on. All right. So kickoff items. I copied this over from our last meeting. I'm going to keep these in the meeting notes here for a while. I opened a community repo where we can file meta issues about like either agenda items. And as well on there, I have a community project board. As a community manager, I like to do all my work out in the open. So if you look at that board, it's like a little stripped down Kanban board of the things I've been working on. So if there's any friction or anything that you find, or you have any cool ideas, is something that you want to work on, absolutely 100% feel free to file an issue there, and I'll take a look at it and we can triage it appropriately. I like to be proud of being affiliationless when doing my community work. So feel free to just ping me if you have any good ideas. My job is to help Cloud Custodian OSS 100% of the time. So feel free to reach out to me for any of that kind of stuff. And if you hadn't noticed last time, I take the notes and everything in the video. We post the video to YouTube every week. If you missed the early beginning, just a heads up, this meeting is being recorded and we are putting this on YouTube. And then the notes and everything in that same community repo in the discussions area, I file in all the these meeting notes. I take them out of this HackMD and I put them in there. I very much believe in GitHub as a source of truth for a lot of things. So I'm going to be shoving as many things into GitHub and not in Google Docs or different things. I like to collate things like that. So unless anyone has any questions about that, we'll move on to the agenda items. All right, enhancements, feature process. Kapil, we talked about this a little bit before, and I think we had, as a group, mostly nodded towards Google Docs for drafting, and then I believe you were going to look at a template. Do you want to fill us in on what you got going on here while I switch over to edit mode?
You said did not spend much time on the proposal, like
Okay.
the template for the first proposal, the first enhancement proposal being the definition of the enhancement process.
Right.
I was spending my time on trying to get through the backlog of PRs. But in general, for people that didn't catch last week, this is basically the notion that larger changes that potentially have impact to user exposed syntax would have some sort of longer form proposal, taking into account consideration, things like backwards compatibility, et cetera. I think there's probably the biggest open question on it that probably needs to be defined is what's the step up between something that doesn't need one and something that does need one, and definitely open for feedback on that. But hopefully we can cover that in that first proposal itself. But no active changes this week on that.
Okay. Anybody else have opinions or given thought to this since we mentioned it last time?
I do like the idea that the first proposal should be the proposal for the process. So I'm definitely a +1 to that, and looking forward to whatever proposal comes out for that, aligning some of the existing work that I have to follow that new process.
Yeah, +1. Yeah, looking forward to it.
Yep. Anyone else? All right, moving on. Oh, the agenda is still open, so if you have something that you want to whack at the bottom here, feel free to do that. And if we have time, we'll get to it. If not, we put in the backlog for next week. Marco, you added this one, policy testing, and then you have a spec. Let's take a look. Go ahead.
Yeah, so speaking of enhancements in feature process, this is something that I kicked around for a little while, and I eventually opened up an issue and a Google Doc with a policy testing proposal. I haven't been able to really, I don't feel like I've gathered really enough interest or feedback from people yet, other than, again, thanks, John, for the +1, and another person who commented. And so I am interested in pushing policy testing forward as a topic, and potentially kind of carving out a small group of people, either Stacklet or community, that are interested in driving this piece forward. But the gist of this is, the thing I've been noticing, especially now more and more as I get deeper and deeper into the sprawl of policies that kind of collect over time, is changing policies can be pretty nuanced, in that a change could effectively potentially wipe out whole swaths of infrastructure. So having a means in which you can easily describe tests for policies and express them in something that's not any one language specific. So in this case, I've gone with a somewhat YAML-esque DSL in the proposal, to be able to run policies through a CI and validate that, given a policy, it does what's expected of it, is something I think that more and more I'm finding a need for in my day-to-day. And I'd like to potentially push this forward from proposal into an accepted proposal. Given that there isn't much of a process today, this seems a little stalled until we get the feature enhancement process and workflow in place. But I like to socialize a little bit here with the group and the community at large, that this does still exist. It's back from January now, and there's a larger Google Doc that outlines kind of the workflow process for it, and see if anyone had any feedback or any follow-up items that they may have come across here in the community. And if not, I'll probably be looking to assist, or once there is an enhancement proposal process, pushing this into the pipeline as one of the first candidates, so that we can start iterating on this inside of the C7N repo. And that's pretty much it. Just more of this exists, and I'm looking to find anyone either here in the community call, if you're watching the video later, please come find me, to kind of get a small group of people across different custodian experiences at different scales of policies, to make sure that what we're authoring, or what we've designed at least, isn't anything that's going to clash or is missing huge chunks of things that would solve problems for people.
I guess I'd have a general +1 on that, because I think the policy testing sounds good. I would like to be involved in it. Great job with the proposal. I think I know there was some discussion about flight recording and how that plays in. So I know that's a bit of an open question. And aside from that, just what's a useful, the most useful first step, beside like, yes, spec looks cool, let's roll with it. And maybe that's after we go through and this gets approved, and you have a small group of people we can roll with. Maybe that's a discussion for that group.
Yeah, I don't know. Every time I come back to this and I think, I'll do a real small straw man, I end up like halfway through, like, okay, this is a very large straw man.
Yeah.
And it's just like, there's so much groundwork that needs to kind of be sketched out. It's hard to either build something very shallow that's not representative of what this would look like, or you end up starting to architect the whole system out. And that's why I always get stalled in that. I don't want to invest a ton of time where I may end up taking an approach that's not really scales well for a lot of people. So that's why I'm kind of interested in getting with a few more people from the community. I know, John, you expressed interest, and I may ping you and Gitter later to run through some things with you. But a more formal approval process and review process would be helpful here.
Please do. I'd like to have a working group. Maybe we could have something going weekly to collaborate a little bit more.
Yeah, we don't really have a process for that either, I guess, George. And
let's start one. All right, so your first action item, Marco, you and I will say proposal working group.
Yeah.
I mean, do we want to? We could also just have a meeting. We don't have to call everything a working group or anything like that.
I think having a meeting to start to figure this out a little bit more, and then publishing that meeting to the same community mailing list would be a good start. It sounds like
okay.
AJ, Liz, and John were at least interested in this group, and then maybe scheduling it for a week or two from now. The other people that are on the mailing list that aren't in this meeting attempt to attend, and we can potentially hash out the current spec and find a couple of what would be like an MVP or a good first start to land code as a code review process without an overwhelmingly large amount of code for the problem would be nice.
Policy. Yeah, plus you're going to need a week because you're going to have to run the doodle to see what time works for everybody and whatever tool you choose to do that. All right.
It doesn't in a single PR too. Like, just to be aware, you can, like, this is going to be in a separate tool subdirectory. It can be incremental per se. And there is at least one item for this, which is in requires some support in Custodian, which I think I saw somewhere on the agenda with regards to policy destinations for lambdas.
So you cut out for a second at the beginning of Appeal, but I think what you said is because this will be in the tools directory, it maybe doesn't have as...
It doesn't need to land as one ginormous PR. Like
okay, yeah.
And I think there's, actually it's probably better that way, but especially with there's a spec that actually lays out sort of directionality on where it wants to go.
Cool.
And then the other part was, I think there's at least one backlog item against Custodian itself and the AWS provider, at least for the functional testing on Lambda event-based policies with regards to destinations, although in fleshing out the spec or review of the spec, that may not be necessary, but there is a separate issue, at least in PR, for that potentially could be worked on.
Cool. Great. I'll go hunt through that PR and add it to the list of things to chat about in this follow-up session.
Yeah, that'd be great because I'd love to have that PR in the notes. I only got half of what Kapil said.
Sorry. I think it's already in the notes. I think it's, if you search for destinations, or destination singular, you'll see it.
And policy support destinations 5250.
That's the one.
Yeah.
All right.
Thank you.
Let me just go ahead and note that. All right. Anything else on this? All right. I wanted to bring up another straw person about possibilities of using Slack as our real-time chat as opposed to Gitter. I know for me, I found a tool that was kind of uncommon compared to other ones. Was kind of weird for me. So I logged this, and then I was informed by lots of people that Slack might be blocked in certain corporate situations and things like that. So I thought I would put this on here. Is anybody feeling strongly about this? Because as Kapil started to rattle off users that are using Cloud Custodian but are blocking Slack, it became clear to me that this isn't a straightforward thing, and that Gitter is been around for 5 years now at this point. Does anyone have super strong opinions on here? I do from an adoption perspective, but I also understand that we gotta kind of listen to users' requirements there.
I'd say Slack is much easier to use and search the history of, but from my prior company, it was blocked. I know that I've heard of some other companies that block it as well. So ultimately, I do like it better as a tool. It's just, yeah, the fact that not everybody would be able to use it.
So I'm not as familiar with Gitter. I'm more familiar with Slack. And I'm wondering if there are some ways that Gitter can be like, we can modify it so that it has more of the aspects of Slack that make Slack easier to use. Because yeah, I would +1 Jameson on Gitter. If you're not, I feel like if you're not as familiar with it, then it can be a little hard to, or can be a little challenging to use it initially.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I would add from the community side of things, like there's a pro and a con in that there's one primary channel. I learned only within the past week that there is another channel. And so because everything's coming in through one, we end up trying to keep discussion very focused and short. And it has kind of a Stack Overflow effect where if it's not right to the point, it's a bit of a distraction, and there's an understandable resistance to that. Which I don't know how much that runs against what you're trying to do, George, here.
Yeah, well, I think it's there's also a benefit, right, to saying like, I'm on AWS, I want all the AWS stuff here, the GCP stuff here, that kind of, my thinking was from like kind of an adoption perspective. When you look at, Kubernetes with like 150,000 users, CNCF with like in the multiples of thousands. But I also want to be cognizant of that. We need to be where the users are. And I didn't want to propose something that's like, okay, we'll just introduce a bunch of new tools. Now, I know Jameson and AJ, I've seen you both in Gitter constantly answering user questions and doing that stuff. And I would hate to basically triple your workload. But I figured, it was worth discussing. And getting feedback so far, it feels like not a lot of people are a fan of it, but it's getting the job done. And it's better than cutting off access to a large swath of users. What do people think?
That seems like a fair summary.
Should I investigate multiple channels?
Is this the definition of democracy? It's the worst form of government, except for all the others.
Well, I mean, the world hasn't fallen apart because you're using Gitter, and I have yet to run into an open source project that has either failed or succeeded because they chose the wrong chat tool. But just in my brain, I'm always thinking, what's the best way to reduce friction? But if Slack is a problem for enterprises because they're not using it, then we have to take that into account. And
the other nice thing with Gitter versus Slack is it does support social auth, so you don't have to have yet another. I have so many Slack accounts. I can't ever keep.
Should I investigate multiple channels? Do we think that'll work, or do you think it'll be like we'll forget and everyone will be in general?
Well, if you make the general channel, sorry, let's go ahead.
Oh, I just think I think it's worth investigating. Just because I kind of am always of the belief that like there is a way to make everything as frictionless as possible, and like now that I've heard more of the argument for, or like some of the cons of Slack, which it sounds like Slack would then kind of lead it in more of like then it's not it's not as inclusive, and there's got to be a way to make Gitter like onboarding or adoption like not like more frictionless, because like it could be as easy as like having something like somewhere easy to discover where it's like, hey, we acknowledge that Gitter might be a little bit intimidating or like difficult to adopt if you're not used to it. Like here's some like tips, right? Because then that just like, I think like even first the acknowledgement is good, right? Because it gives maybe people the feeling that like, or lets others know like, yeah, we get it. It's a little weird at first, but trust us.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think that you could at the very least do that.
All right.
I'd say the biggest pain point for Gitter is the search. I mean, the post stuff and reply, it's fairly easy. Some of the replies can get a little wonky if you're doing code snippets or trying to edit a reply or something like that. But honestly, the main issue that I personally have with Gitter is just the search history is real. It doesn't display the results in a very efficient manner, and it just makes finding previous posts on a topic painful. So I don't know if there's a way where, this is kind of far out there, but if we were able to take the extracted content from Gitter and put it into a system that made the search a lot easier to do. Though that would be, then you have a separate system that you'd have to go search, which wouldn't be ideal, but that's kind of the main pain point from my point of view.
Could GitHub discussions be a medium for this too, and kind of do Stack Overflow style threads?
I mean, we technically have a Stack Overflow. I think, like currently, if we looked at all of our different channels, we've got Gitter, a mailing list, Reddit, and Stack Overflow. And part of the question is are we fragmenting ourselves too much? And the more channels we add, the more things we have to monitor and maintain. And I think there's a lot of value to having a critical critical mass on a user population in one place so that people can actually answer each other's stuff. Whereas creating additional channels is, I don't know. Same time, like, you don't want to like be inertia to trying out something new. In that context, at least get our discussions, you know, to me it'd be like, hey, do we want to try a trial? We want to try this out for a little bit and see if it's worthwhile. Especially if we could do like, I think there's a lot of common questions that come up in chat, and to Jameson's point, part of the reason they get asked over and over again is just search, not great. And having a more threaded discussion forum where some of that stuff can surface up has a good amount of value.
So the trend that so there's two things real quickly is, it sounds like there's a critical mass of users already in Gitter. Unless we completely shut down Gitter to move somewhere else, it doesn't make sense to fracture chat.
Agree.
The one thing that keeps coming up is search is painful, but I think the underlying issue there is that people aren't able to Google the questions they're looking for and have to come to chat constantly. This might pair well with the documentation stuff that you were talking about, George, but it may be worthwhile pulling up like what are the last X questions that were asked in Gitter this last week, and let's just go write doc pages for those, because the Sphinx docs will generate much better searchability than what we have in Gitter, and measure if that cuts down on duplicate questions being asked over and over again.
Yeah. I was also thinking regularly dumping I'm assuming we have access to the Gitter logs to a Git repo, and then you can rip grep to your heart's content, right?
Yeah, my number one pain point with Gitter is just lack of anything useful on mobile. I'm constantly on mobile, and it's very hard to thread into a reply. And if I do it in Matrix versus the web client versus the native client, it's all different results.
Yeah, and that's where I was kind of going with the discussion suggestion, because then you can centralize some of that stuff on GitHub, and it's supported by the native client, so you can get a mobile desktop. It'll be the same interface.
Okay.
Yeah, I opened discussions for Cloud Custodian, but then I locked it because I didn't want people to start posting stuff there and be like, hey, who's checking that, to create another thing, with the intention of only posting like the meeting notes and, stuff like that. Maybe we could use it grabbing useful things from Gitter and maybe, cleaning it up, like your top 5 questions of that week, right? And then we bust them out and kind of put them there. Might be a good place to start. Liz, you and I will think about that when we talk about it.
That's not a bad test.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I didn't. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
So can you thread them? Like, can you thread this? Like, sorry, not thread. Can you create multiple boards or sections, I guess, of threads?
Yes. Yeah, you could. We could easily create a FAQ or, top Q&A from chat or something like that. Liz and I will do that. Because I didn't want to take up the bulk of the meeting talking about Slack, because I know how we all love to talk about our tools. But yeah, why don't we investigate discussions, because that gets us mobile for free. We're using it for meeting notes anyway, maybe a curated set of useful facts. A question for the group of the people that are here: is there anyone actively scrubbing the Cloud Custodian tag on Stack Overflow? Because what we used to do in the past is just tell everyone to go to the tag, and then you curate the tag, and then the kind of top 10 FAQ generates itself based on traffic, votes, and things like that. But that also takes a level of commitment that I don't know if everyone's willing to take. But
yeah, I think that part's tricky. I mean, I've tried to go poke at Stack Overflow, but I think the activity on there is low enough because there's not enough there. And then, so I do think it's a chicken egg thing. Yeah.
And we don't have to do all these things all at once too, right? Like these can be like incremental, right? Like, find out what works, but like start with like, prioritizing these different things, because it's like, this is what we want to achieve. And these are like this is our MVP, and then these are our nice to haves. So I think like, because we could get into a whole discussion here, but it's like trying to remember that like we don't have to do everything all at once. Like,
Yeah. Plus, we have some work to do as far as figuring out what it would look like if we did discussions. How hard is it to scroll back and try to get the answers we need? So there's homework left to do there. Okay, anything left on this topic? I don't want to dominate the meeting with this one.
Yeah, on the topic of like searchability, specifically for discussions, have you found that it's like the SEO is like good for finding answers to stuff? Like usually if I Google something and I mean maybe it's just other communities don't really use discussions as much, but I don't think I've ever seen a discussion link pop up in Google. That would be my only concern, because I don't want people to just ask like, why isn't my policy running, as like a GitHub issue. Like that is not the appropriate forum for that. But typically that is where I seem to find answers a lot of the time for other open source projects. So that's my main concern with discussions. But maybe some, I mean, Stack Overflow is great for SEO for sure. It's just we would have to curate that and be on it all the time.
Yeah. And Kapil just mentioned he's never Googled something and you end up on a GitHub discussion. GitHub issue, sure, but never a discussion. Okay. That gives us, Liz, that gives us stuff to think about and do research on. And that kind of sort of relates to, Liz was pinging me and said, I really want to work on docs a little bit every week. And we got to talking and we decided that her and I could just hop on a call like this once a week. We'll probably pick, I don't know, a Thursday or a Friday. But do it open like this. Just hop on a thing like this, open a browser, share the screen, find a pain point in the docs, and then just bust it out, spend an hour a week on that. And we figure we can leave that open invite if people want to join in to learn something. Maybe you ran into a bug and the docs there confused you and you can like bring it up to us, and then we can maybe quickly, sprint on that little topic there and kind of get the docs into a place where like, wouldn't it be neat if when people report new bugs and then you find that, oh no, it's because of this section of the docs wasn't specific enough. You can kind of fix that much quicker, and then that gives you that little open source dopamine. So if anybody has any ideas on that, I don't think we're going to put it on the calendar or anything like that. As soon as I figure out how to put a subject line in Gitter, I think we could put that there and then just kind of ping everyone in the channel saying, hey, we're going to hop on, we're going to fix the getting started page today or whatever it is. I've pinged this on Twitter with other community managers, other projects, see if they do something like this. Anyone have any ideas or comments or things that they'd like to see us working on there? See, Liz, I told you it was a good idea.
Sorry. Anything top of mind specifically on the docs?
Liz, did you have a specific page? I was just going to go in order, but we can do them whatever.
Yeah. No, I don't have a specific page. It's been my experience around, because like I'm coming into this from like kind of a different trajectory, right? And so like I have found that some of the things that maybe seem like obvious to someone who's more familiar with it is not like as obvious to me. And so then I always find myself like, I can't think of a specific example right now, but then I find myself like hung up on little things that then could also like, sometimes it's just like, oh, I just need to be explained that like, oh, I know what it was. It was the Custodian mailer. I think maybe it was the way the information was arranged or there's something about it that made it, for some reason I didn't realize that then like final step is like run it, and like was like went to AJ and I was like, what do I do next? And I can't remember specifically what it was about that, but it's just like, it's just it would be just like a minor thing, like maybe even like a summary at the top of like, this is how this works. And then like going into the different, notifications that you can use. So that's kind of more or less like what I was experiencing was like, oh, I would like kind of like this bigger picture view of it, so then like I can work from there, like so that I know where I'm trying to go on the like treasure map, and then I can like look at the different options for like how to get there.
Yeah,
So-
that's super useful.
Yeah, one thing that would be great to do is that one thing that we're desperately missing in the docs is a narrative tutorial.
Yeah.
It walks people through getting started. This is what it looks like to write a policy. This is what it looks like to run it. It's definitely super helpful for someone new to the project as they're getting up to speed to do that, because they have this mystical thing called beginner's mind with regards to it that a lot of us have lost. And so that would be a fantastic contribution, because I think that's something that we've got some community blog posts that actually I think do better jobs than our official docs with regards to that narrative style tutorial. So it would be great to actually have something in our docs that does that.
I would also note we do have a few videos, like tutorials and walkthroughs on like running a event-based policy, running, writing a poll-based policy and stuff like that. I think we could probably take the bones of those and build out, like you said, like a narrative style, like doc page, because people sometimes don't prefer to watch a video. And having it all in text also makes it easier, so you don't have to like transcribe from a video feed into like a YAML document.
Yeah, I think having both videos, a narrative style, sometimes it feels like I'm reading a dictionary and not an instruction manual. I think this can help us. But as I've said before, I'm a stickler for cadence. So, if Liz and I are just going to commit to 1 hour a week, if you want to show up, if you got the hour to do it with us, I think just 1 hour a week, we could start to at least sand down a lot of the paper cuts and get to where we need to be. Videos, that's a great idea, Sunny. That's awesome. Anybody else have any other ideas?
I love the idea of video, just so that I can finally say I used that film school degree.
Yeah, I saw someone on Gitter mention that they watched the event-based one, which is the one that I did for KubeCon EU. So I was surprised. I didn't think anyone was actually like looking that up, but apparently so. So I think we should probably do something with that information.
Do we keep Custodian talks on the website?
Probably not on the website. I think I don't actually. Maybe that's a follow-up item to see. Like, how did you actually find this? I'm curious.
That is a George item. We definitely. I'm gonna put investigate video section. I know some projects I've worked on in the past, right? They just put like, and here's our video playlist of all of our talks, and you just click on it and you subscribe to it, and there's everything you could ever want to know for the past 3 years of KubeCon talks or something. I'm sure we can start to at least build something like that. That's a good idea, especially if someone's told you that they watched the video and learned something useful from it.
Yeah, there's different styles of learning.
Yeah,
I think learning about
sure.
video and docs is helpful.
Mm-hmm. Anybody else? All right. GCP maintainer update. Kapil, do we want to talk about this one or next week?
Let's switch to the backlog.
All right. And then with that kind of handles everything from the agenda items. Anyone want to add anything new or any questions about what we discussed? If not, if you want to bail, you can bail. We spend the rest of the time of the 15 minutes kind of going over outstanding PRs. So if you're looking to dive into a PR or looking for a place to help, stick around. All right, moving on to the PR review. Kapil, I think you had good news on app autoscaling.
Yeah, looks like all the feedback got addressed, and just a matter of merging it. So that was great.
It looks like you did merge it.
Yeah. was quite a lot of back and forth, but and I think it came out pretty well overall.
Yeah.
So
Let's there a ta-da here? There we go. All right. This next one, GCP IAM filter.
yeah, I think this one I think I've got some feedback for the author. I was noodling on it. I think the challenge is that we don't want to namespace squat on something that's just doing raw doc evaluation. We want to actually keep the filter name and push the value filter again. So this is, sorry, background context. Effectively, every GCP, lots of GCP resources have embedded IAM policies. That's basically a JSON blob in a particular format. This basically lets you do, this filter lets you do JMES path expressions, value filters against that JSON doc. In practice, that is actually a really poor way of expressing any semantic intent with regards to that JSON doc. Like, I'm not exposing this to users outside of my org is actually really hard to express against a raw JSON doc with JMES path. So I think the goal here would be, at the same time, there's a lot of useful stuff here, like it fetches the policy docs for lots of different resources. Let's go ahead and push the value filter portion of that to like a sub attribute instead of taking over the top namespace on the filter. So it'll be more like IAM policy and then as the filter name, and then doc colon, and then the sub mapping for the actual value filter. Seems like a good compromise to keep this feature and capability, but still allow for future expansion into more semantic-oriented use cases.
Sure.
Any thoughts on that from, I don't know if there's any GCP users in the house, but yeah, fair enough.
All right. And then you have the GCP folder one, which is a different one. Any opinions on this one?
Nope.
Yeah, I don't think there's movement on this one, so we'll do no change this week. AWS contrib docs code coverage status failed. Marco volunteered to help out on this one, though I think he had to bail.
I actually did the legwork on this one and got it merged, so that's also done.
All right.
I was busy unit test for one of the code changes. Yeah.
No worries. Metrics, AJ, you said you're going to take a look at this. Anything to report?
Yeah, so I've got a comment on the PR, not the issue, because yeah, that comment's a little older. But on the PR 6310.
Everyone watch me URL house 6310.
Yeah, pop it up there.
Allow custom periods to be used with CPU utilization filters.
Yes. Yeah, so I went back and looked, and I added an example, which now makes it clear to me. It may be clear to 0 additional people, so that's why discussions like this are useful. So
all right.
Anybody even now or later, if you happen to look through that and say, okay, you added words, but it doesn't actually help, that's totally fair. But what I think is going on there is that they're looking for a way to match metrics, to kind of bin metrics over a period of time and then match any individual bin.
Mm-hmm.
But the way that the PR is structured seems to be just kind of re-implementing the client, filtering on the client side, which is what I think Kapil had mentioned previously. So I think it seems like there's a valid use case, like a bit of an edge case, but a valid one. But I don't think this PR is going to fix it. So
okay.
That's it for now.
Cool. Any questions on this one?
I guess my question to the group, and we can punt on this, is right now we're taking, if we look at metrics, we're giving it a certain amount of days, and we're just setting the period to that whole span of days and pulling back one data point. Does it make sense to allow a custom period where we can say, let's look back 2 weeks, and break that into chunks of 1 day each, and then match if any one of those days matches a given set of criteria. Like, is that a valid case we want to support?
So would that be multiple API calls for each bucket in that context?
It should be the one API call, but we'll get back instead of one, like a data, what we've been assuming, and the code focuses on this. It tries to make a call and get metrics back where there's an array of data points with only one item in it. And we would instead want to get, to match any item in that array.
Seems reasonable. The other concern is that we currently store the metrics as an annotation, and that potentially gets fairly unwieldy at large volumes on the metrics data. It can cause issues downstream for notifications, and yeah, I would just be sensitive to that. The other thing, I mean, I've had a pipe dream for a while on, at least on notifications, of instead of having statically sized buffers, doing dynamically sized buffers, where, notifications are effectively how we send messages out to the mailer. There are static limitations to what the max size of a packet is, and we currently hard code that as far as how many resources we will buffer or batch to try to fit generally within that window. Obviously, resources size vary widely by type, so there's a question there. If we massively inflate the resource with a large list of metrics, then all those calculations are off. Would be the concern.
That's true. That is a good concern. Okay, that's worth noting. Maybe on the PR too, so we don't lose track of it. That's a good one.
All right. Anything else on this one?
Don't we already strip certain bits of resource metadata? Sending to the mailer for certain resources.
Yeah, there are one or two. It's very piecemeal. I want to say there's like 2 of them out there. Remember, one of them was like EC2 user data, where we keep the cache, an annotation cache, and then we purposely pop it out. But it's a pretty, and we could do that from this case too, if we enable that. But when we do that, we also, yeah, that we can do that for this case too.
Okay, moving on. Automatic layers for AWS policy. Oh, sorry.
Right. One more comment of that. Like,
sure,
we either do that or we selectively prune it, because in some cases you want the metrics in the message as well. So, yeah, it gets nuanced.
All right, automatic layers for AWS policies. Last time we looked at this, you said this was general, kind of like a number of issues around this, like a long-term backlog thing.
Number of issues. I think it's mostly about how to, like, this is fairly fundamental, and just trying to make sure that we limit the number of API calls, that we participate fully with dry run, and that that we don't break any existing custom workflows with regards to layers and packages, were the 3 things. I think there was a separate notion of having something being able to run and look at all the policies that are to be run in a given execution, such that it doesn't have to do all the layer checks sort of per policy.
And it looks like you did reopen this an hour ago.
I did.
Yeah. You weren't thinking of putting what you just said into that comment box, are you? or maybe a little summary on the reopening?
Yep.
That'd be dope. Thank you. It doesn't have to be that detailed. Anything else on this one? All right, just a few more converting tags. We had come to a conclusion on this one before, right? Let's see, Todd, what's wrong with this?
I don't know if there was ever a conclusion. I
Yeah.
stated my case and
Yeah.
put it in the ticket, but I don't know how other folks feel about it.
Oh, I can. So sorry. Did we have the original use case, or we just think it was related to copy-related tags? I think that's what was missing. Was what was the underlying straw that broke the camel's back?
Yeah, I think it was copy-related resource tag because some of the resources, the way that it's presented from AWS is in different format, in key value format versus list format, and depending on what I ran into this doing something. I don't remember the exact resources now, and which got me down the world of I should make a function that like automatically convert from one to the other so that we can simplify this, and it just kind of blossomed into a much larger PR, thinking we might as well just use this everywhere. And then like as you're passing, here's a set of tags to use for this function, like you don't really care if it's in list format or key value format, and it would just work either way.
I have to look at copy-related resources, but like generally in Custodian, we always normalize on the resource to the format that we can do universal tag matching against with the value filter. So all the tag actions accept the same inputs, and I'm just trying to, yeah, I was trying to figure out what the actual problem was, but yeah.
All right.
We have a bunch of Cap 1 folks on the call. Anyone have any comments on convert tags or had a chance to look at it?
I need to look into it a little bit more. I do remember coming across something weird like that, where when some are in list form and some are in dictionary form, but I can't remember the circumstances. I'll try to take a deeper look tonight, Todd.
Yeah, and I'll try and dig through again and see if I can stumble across the use case that I stumbled across that started all this.
So everyone remembers running into this, but not exactly when.
Yeah.
All right, cool. And then we have one on converting tags that we had talked about last week.
That's what we just talked about.
Oh, I'm sorry. This one, AWS code deploy. Thank you.
Yeah, that's a new PR. Is that the right link?
Oh, this is yours. All right.
Yeah. Yeah.
Do you want to talk about it? You happy with things are going, or?
Yeah, I just wanted to get some thoughts on this with regards to implementing different resources of code deploy. So I have code deploy applications and deployment implemented. Not sure if there is something on top that would have to be in here.
Yeah, I'm not fully familiar with code deploy. Every time I've looked at it for my own personal stuff or whatnot, I've always felt like it's very real.
Yeah.
In looking at it for this one, I think the weird thing to me was, like, generally we don't operate on data. Like, it seemed like it was application deployment group, deployment, but deployment group was optional in the middle, or you could directly call the deployment for an application without going through the deployment group. I think the stated use case was trying to make sure sort of what the sources and destinations were valid ones. The challenge with the deployments is it almost felt like a data plane activity, and I just like Patricia and I have been chatting back and forth a little bit on Gitter as well about this. About deployments themselves are immutable once they reach a final state, but you potentially can stop them in the middle, which makes me wonder: is that safe versus attaching? Like, if we can do it at the deployment group level, then we can you could stop it before the application actually gets into a weird state through an actual deployment that's using backconfig. What was unclear to me in that context was it wasn't clear that a deployment always needed a deployment group. If that was the case, then we could just target deployment group instead of deployments, because in targeting deployments, we're potentially at a very different data volume level, although potentially not meaningful. It might be hundreds or thousands as opposed to billions in S3 or something. But the other question would be leaving applications in inconsistent states if we stop it mid-deployment was the other part that was a little unclear.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea to have the deployment group resource as well in there. But the only downside with regards to implementation would be, would it be able to trigger based off an event? Since I think deployment group would have to be a child resource of application type. Because if that doesn't happen, then I think it would beat the purpose.
So when you see deployments, are they associated to a deployment group, or are they just associated to an application and people are triggering them?
They are associated to a deployment group. I think you cannot trigger a deployment without a deployment group.
Okay, so if that's the case, then if we target deployment groups, then we can avoid the application having to deal with commercial deployments that were stopped. And it's probably a lower cardinality. So it sounds like it would be a child resource with maybe needing a custom describe resource.
Augment function. Yeah. Got it. Okay, I'll go ahead and try to get it in here as a child resource. See how that goes.
Awesome. And with that, we're at the top of the hour. So if you have a meeting, you're a minute late. But thanks, everyone. And we'll see everyone next week. Open agenda, and I'll get the notes out to the list as soon as possible. Thank you, everyone. Great job.